Question.
Worst MP in 50 years.
Question number 5. Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Settle down, Jerry. Did he approve the recommendation in the Treasury Report, Capital Investment, Recycling and the Fiscal Strategy? And if so, what priorities for capital recycling within the commercial portfolio did he indicate to officials?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I declined some recommendations and approved others. With regard to the second part of the question, commercial priorities for capital recycling are just that, commercial. What I can say is the government has a clear policy of no further government share offer type sales or indeed no outright sales of SOEs. We will maintain our current ownership of SOEs. Of course, all businesses owned by the government need to actively manage their balance sheet. That is, where they have assets that are no longer useful, they should sell those assets and recycle the capital. So individual SOEs will be buying and selling assets all the time as part of their usual business.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does he still accept the Treasury assessment in the paper that at least $2 billion of savings are achievable through so-called capital recycling from SOEs and Crown entities?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, over a period of, who knows, 5 to 7 years, that may be possible. I have to say that realising those kind of savings would prove to be a considerable challenge. So it's the savings would come from a combination of dispensing with assets that are no longer needed, for instance, land held in Auckland by the Ministry of Education that it no longer thinks is right for the new schools that it wants to build, as well as demanding extensive discipline over government agencies' capital planning intentions, so that they don't just dream up projects that invest more money than is needed.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Why was it appropriate that the Treasury develop proposals for the partial sale of assets within SOEs without discussing them with the boards of the respective entities, as noted in the paper?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the government often discusses policy about assets it owns or businesses it owns without consulting directly with the board. Housing New Zealand, for instance, might have had a different view about our social housing policy than the government has, because they prefer to be the monopoly over all the state houses in the country, and we prefer them not to be a monopoly. So at the appropriate time we discuss it with the board, but in the end the government makes the decisions that it makes, and the boards are there to carry them out because they are 100% owned subsidiaries.
Good question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Has he now informed the boards of all entities for which proposals are being developed for the partial sale of their capital?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, no, I haven't been part of informing the boards of all entities. What I have been part of is making it clear to these boards that if they have assets they're not using and are important to their business, they shouldn't just sit on them in the way that they might under a Labor government, where apparently wasting taxpayers' money is compulsory.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Did he approve work on the sale of Landcorp Farms as part of his response to this paper?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, well, I'm not exactly sure which paper he's referring to, but it's unlikely that I specifically approved work on that. I would expect the board of Landcorp, as with the board of any other SOE, to be focusing on the sustainability of their business. After all, we only own these businesses because Kiwis work hard every day, including out in the rain and the cold, or run small businesses where they work 16 hours a day to try and make a living. It's their money we're talking about, and we expect the boards to pay respect to that and make sure they're using that money efficiently.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Apart from land owned by Kiwi Rail, has he approved further work on the sale of other Kiwi Rail capital?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, no, but then the board of Kiwi Rail doesn't need the approval of the Finance Minister to think hard about whether it does something with the excess land that it doesn't need. It would be much better if they proceeded, as I understand they are, to, for instance, talk to councils around the country about what the possibilities are for housing development on some of the land that KiwiRail owns and may sell to a developer or develop in partnership with a developer. But we don't believe that it's compulsory to waste taxpayers' money the way New Zealand First and Labor do. If it's not being used...
Order. The question's been up.
Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave of the House to table a Treasury report entitled Capital Investment, Recycling and the Fiscal Strategy dated 3 November 2014.
Order. Before I seek put the leave, is it available on the Treasury website?
Released under the OIA.
That's not the question I asked. Order. Is it available for members to get on the...
It was released to us under the OIA.
On the basis that the member doesn't know that, I'll put the leave and the House can decide. Leave is sought to table that particular OIA request. Is there any objection? Point of order. The Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr. Speaker, we have had a Business Committee discussion around this, and it is pretty clear, certainly from our side of the House, that if something is released under the Official Information Act, it is most likely to be on a website. Because the member doesn't know, doesn't alter the fact. If you would like government departments to provide you with a list on a daily basis of what's released so you can make a selection, that would be one way through. But taking the time of the House, day after day after day, seeking to release information that's publicly available, in an age when newspapers aren't quite the way that most communicate these days, that's unreasonable.
Order. No, I don't need assistance. There was a discussion at the Business Committee yesterday. Subsequent to that, I asked the clerk to do some work on whether documents are always then subsequently released under the OA and immediately put onto a website. We couldn't ascertain that they all were. There may be some that are. So I think the way forward is in the future, we'll hope that members have done the homework to check whether it's available on a website. I'll expect them to have done so. If they seek leave, I will ask them whether it's available. If it's available, don't expect me to continue with the leave. Sometimes members may not be able to ascertain whether it's available, in which case the easiest way forward is I do put the leave. It's then in the hands of the House as to whether leave is granted or denied. Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, to assist the House, this material was requested under the OIA and was released to us on the 13th of August in a heavily redacted manner. I don't think necessarily we would expect a paper like that to be on the website.
Thank the member for his contribution. Question number 6, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.